Welcome
Are
to
we going?
Shut up. Welcome to Stories of Brisco and Bradshaw. I'm Bradshaw, and that is the very talkative and very interruptive Mr. Brisco, who is a Chickasaw native, Chickasaw Hall of Famer, Oklahoma's favorite son, Gerald Brisco. And we've got a treat today because we got some history coming at us that is fantastic to go through. Jim Barnett is one of the greatest characters in wrestling history. So much is not known about him, but this man, one of wrestling's greatest historians, knows all about him. He's got a book out on Dory Funk Sr., the Amarillo Territory, the Substack newsletter. You can subscribe. Find him on X, formerly Twitter, at Tony Richards 4. He is Mr. Tony Richards. He's a friend of the show and a friend of ours. Tony, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you guys. It's good to be here. Look at all my beautiful stars.
My boys are all stars, my boys. We'll all be doing Jim Barnett before this show's over, so just bear with.
When
Tony,
I look
I can't tell you what kind of pleasure it was to sit down and just after the event there and Herb Simmons' great event in St. Louis, sit down in a pub, a local pub there, and just start talking wrestling history. I mean, John says, I was around for Abraham Lincoln, before pre-NWA, but I think you were there with me. But man, we had a ball just sitting there talking about wrestling history. If you ever get a chance, you see Tony anywhere, come up to him. And I gotta apologize to Tony publicly. He came up to me, and I was right in the middle of how these fans come up and just get in your face and take a damn picture. He happened to walk up just as this guy was taking my picture. I said, just go and move on. I mean, I've read my friend off to chew out the guy out. And Tony came up and apologized to me later.
That's terrible.
He came up to apologize to me later. I just told him, I said it was just bad timing.
Oh, man, I thought he was going to shoot on that guy. And I thought, hey, if he shoots on him, he's going to shoot on me. I better
Unbelievable. He's a hot-tempered Okie is what he is.
But one of the greatest things about it was Robert Gibson taught us the beer bottle trick. So
yeah.
We got.
I've already forgotten it was so great.
It was
Robert
a fun
usually has
time.
some jokes that are forgettable too.
Oh yeah, one right after another.
Hey Tony, what brought about your passion for history? You know so much about it. We're going to get into Jim Barnett and Johnny Doyle and so many other things, but what brought about your passion for history of wrestling?
I just like history in general. You can kind of tell back here behind me. I'm sort of a reader, right? And so I love.
Yeah, you know what I hate about that? You're so damn organized. I'm glad you can't get a good shot of my bookcase over here.
Well, we don't want to take a wide shot back here. But yeah, I love biographies. I love reading about people's lives. It's a real cool thing that it takes somebody 80 or 90 years to live a life, but you can take a couple of weeks and learn everything about them and learn all the mistakes they made and all the successes they had. And it's just interesting to me. And wrestling has some of the most interesting people in it. So, yeah. And there's 5 or 6 guys that I think, man, we need more talk about them. And so Dory Funk was one of them. Jim Barnett's one of them. There's a couple more that we'll hold that in our back pocket for future episodes.
And are you talking Dory Funk Sr.?
Yeah, Dory Funk Sr., Doc Sarpololis.
Yeah, let's take a minute to talk about your book, Dory Funk Sr. What all does that entail? I mean, right from the very beginning when Funk first moved to Amarillo, right? Actually, when he first went down there to compete for California, I believe it was.
Yeah, so the book opens actually with people moving west to settle Texas and how wrestlers were making their way across the country.
They didn't need settling.
Wrestler, you read about that in John Langbeed's book, right? In the Ballyhoo, about how guys were working, they were shooting, they were going across the country making a living wrestling, and so they did other jobs. And in Texas, you had the guys working the oil fields, you had them working the ranches, and there were some tough dudes. And so Amarillo just was a tough, that whole West Texas was just a tough environment. And there wasn't really very much to do, right? So there was a lot of there was a lot of drinking, there was a lot of dancing. The towns were so far apart. I think this is interesting. The towns were so far apart that they started having barn parties and house parties. Like all the neighbors would come to one house or one barn, and they'd have entertainment, they'd have dancing or whatever. And that was still going on. It's probably still going on now. But Dory Funk Sr. was well known for his ranch and house parties, and he even died at one. You know, he died at his own house party.
Wrestling.
Yeah. But everybody I've talked to that knew him have been to one of his parties and talked about the barbecue and the cookout and the fun and how it will eventually come down to some guys wrestling each other. And that's just something that started in West Texas a long time ago. And as he adapted the West Texas lifestyle, you know, his hero, you know, somebody asked me this on a podcast the other day. There's the cowboy thing with Dory Funk. Was that just a gimmick? Because he was from Indiana.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, yeah, he was from Indiana, but he went out in West Texas in 1947. And his hero was the movie star Roy Rogers.
Wow.
And so he slowly but surely kind of became Roy Rogers, right? The Outlaws are going to beat him down all the way to the end, and then he's going to make the miraculous comeback and ride off victorious at the end of the movie. That's kind of Dory Funk's matches, right? That's kind of his programs with the heels.
Right.
So,
And Tony, the guy who is his booker, the doctor, what was his name?
Doc Sarpololis.
Sarpololis. He's the one that first came up with, like, I guess, is accredited with the Blade, right?
Yeah, Doc Sarpololis was actually the owner of the territory because back in those days, athletic commissions wouldn't give you double license. If you were licensed to be a wrestler, you couldn't be a promoter. If you were a lot of states, we're going to talk about this today when we talk about Los Angeles, some states you couldn't be a booker and be a promoter. And so Doc Sarpololis was a little bit like Nick Goulas. He was the front man. And Dory Funk was a little like Roy Welch. He was in the background because he was a worker. That same thing happened in Tennessee with those two guys, where Nick was out front and Roy was a performer. And so that happened with Dory and Doc Sarpololis. Doc was the guy who probably came up with the ref bump. He's the guy that came up with the first complicated finishes. He invented the Texas Heavyweight Championship. He was just a real power broker, and will probably be mentioned in this episode later on. But
did they also have the first Texas death match?
Yeah, and I don't know exactly. You know, sometimes bookers get credit for things wrestlers come up with, and sometimes wrestlers get credit for things bookers come up with. It probably was a collaboration between Sarpololis and Funk to do the Texas death match, but that became Dory Funk's most well-known match.
We're going to get into this in the LA territory with Johnny Doyle, who becomes a partner with Jim Barnett, about the difference between talent and bookers. You can't be both. It just seems like to me these commissions just had no idea what they're doing. I mean, I understand the separation, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it?
The NWA was formed for two reasons. The first one was to consolidate the World Championship. And the second was, before the NWA came along and the promoters started working together and working in cooperation, the commissions ruled. I mean, they ruled everything. As a matter of fact, the National Wrestling Association, which was the NWA before, was commissioners. That's who made up the National Wrestling Association.
God, I'd hate to work for that group.
Yeah. And that's, you know, Tom Pack.
We wouldn't very long, John.
No, we wouldn't. We would be outlaws and independents before long.
Tom Pack, who basically ran St. Louis and who was partners with Lou Thez and his father, that's who they were associated with. They were associated with the National Wrestling Association, and Tom Pack politically controlled the entire state of Missouri because of that. And so when Mushnick came along, he was the outlaw. You know, he was the one invading. He wasn't the established guy.
Inform me on something. You said something that I didn't know about. You said Lou Thez and his father.
Yeah, Martin Thez.
Well, I kind of fill us in on Martin Thez, because that's the name that I really hadn't heard too much of.
Yeah, he worked with Tom Pack in his promotion. He was about, I think he had points in it. But
was he a wrestler too? Or
no, he wasn't. No, but
so that's where Lou's love of the sport kind of began, then, right?
Yeah, I think that Lou's father is the one who contacted Strangler Lewis, and Strangler Lewis came in and worked out with Lou and basically put him to shame, like put him down, and then Lou almost quit wrestling. Like, I'm not very good, you know, and didn't realize he just worked with the best guy at the time, And so Strangler, Martin Thez calls up Strangler and goes, "Hey, my boy's about to quit because of the way you did that." And Strangler Lewis comes back and has a meeting with Lou, and he goes, "Hey, listen, you have the potential to be really good. I just wanted to see how good, and I put you down, but you need to hang in there because you're going to be really good at this."
Wow,
so
that's a great story.
So these commissions at this time, they control the NWA, the Old Wrestling Association. They had controlled everything. Was run by the commissions. What a horrible sporting environment to be in.
In Tennessee, this is a whole different thing, but in Tennessee, Roy Welch was actually the guy who got the commission involved because people were doubting wrestling, and the state government was kind of getting in their business and all that. And he goes, "Well, the best way to control this is to get the government on our side." So they created the Athletic Commission in Tennessee for that reason. And Nick and Roy pretty much controlled the commission, but other places the commission controlled the promoters. So you had different environments in different states.
And then when the NWA came along, the idea was to take the commissions out of power by forming this coalition, this monopoly, and having the power to control wrestling.
Right, because the promoters were funding the commission, right? They're the ones that were paying the taxes and paying the taxes on the shows and all that. So the promoters were the revenue stream. So the NWA, Mushnick and Pinky George and those guys that formed it, they're like, "Hey, we have the control over these guys' cash coming in. Like, we should have more of a say here." And so slowly but surely, as the NWA grew, the commission influence shrank.
This is a bigger work than our business, right?
Yeah.
This is the real this is the real freaking carny stuff going on right now. Is the stuff going on behind the scenes? Not saying that the stuff in front of it isn't, but the stuff behind the scenes is the real carny stuff with these old Barnum and Bailey promoters with the cigars and top hats, and they're stealing money and all that. It's like there's some shady stuff going on.
Well, it's interesting, and what's great about these shows we're going to do here is we're going to see events with different people repeated a couple of times. Right, it's going to be the same situation with different names, except for a couple. And Jim Barnett's one of the guys who's always seems to be involved.
I was looking at a thing. We did a take on Don Eagle and Gorgeous George, the screw job. We did a little show on it. You can check it out on our YouTube channel. But I was looking at because I was getting ready for our show today, and I was reading some stuff on it. And one of the big things on the internet was the first screw job, Don Eagle and Gorgeous George. Like, that's not even the top 100.
No.
The first screw jobs.
But it was probably the first nationally televised one.
For a while.
Correct. Because they didn't have television for Wayne Munn and Stanislaus Zbyszko or Dick Schickhott and Dan O'Mahony or any of those guys back then.
Which was what made that screw job so effective for the purpose of it, which essentially was Fred Kohler making a point. He made a point nationwide, with that one, where it's, really affected things.
Always picking on the natives.
That's right. You notice how there was a native involved in that screw job and a referee named Earl.
Referee
a lot
named
of
Earl.
commonalities in history.
That's right.
History repeats itself.
Well, Tony, let's get started with Jim Barnett. This is one of the most interesting characters. Why? Let me ask you first of all, why has not more been done on Jim Barnett? I mean, he to me is one of the most integral characters in wrestling history, and there's just not a lot of stuff on him. Why do you think that is?
I'm not sure, because he's such a fascinating character, and he's involved in pretty much everything from 40 years. I'm not sure. I'm just glad I'm the guy that's kind of gathering it up and putting it together, and we're going to have a couple of great shows here about it. So at least he'll be mentioned and talked about pretty thoroughly here over the next couple of shows.
So you're the greatest.
Jim is certainly not a shy guy. Wasn't not a shy guy. I mean, he would probably be more than willing right now to probably sit down if he was still with us and share his stories, and probably in really detailed manner. That's just the way Jim was. I was fortunate enough to spend a long time. I told John this morning, after reading your notes on your upcoming publication about Jim, I was fortunate enough to sit under that learning tree from 1970 to when Jim passed away, and and what he always had something to teach you, and he was never shy about correcting you, but correcting you in a way where he would tell you the right way to do things. And that's what I always appreciated about Jim. He would get down on you, but then he would tell you what you did wrong and how to correct it. And he was a marvelous man.
He there's a couple of interviews out there with Jim. There's one really good one in Australia where he's being interviewed by the network in Australia, and they're talking to him about wrestling, and he's doing the kayfabe. I don't know who's going to win. I just think it's a great sport, but the thing about it is people have done the impression of Jim for so long and so often that he really doesn't sound that pronounced, that when people do that, he's really pretty even in the way that he talks,
People who've never heard Jim Barnett speak do Jim Barnett impressions.
Oh, they do it based on what they heard somebody else do.
That's right. That's right. And when they do it, other people who've never heard Jim Barnett speak either know exactly what they're talking about.
Oh, all they have to say is "my boy," and they
my
know
boys, my boys.
Yep.
That's awesome. So
and what's great is I've talked to so many people that worked with Jim, worked for Jim, a lot of wrestlers and a lot of different people, and they all kind of have the same story about him. That he was really smart in that. Most of the time, now every now and then he got a little out of bounds on a few things as far as business was concerned, but he really knew what he didn't know. And I just think that's so important if you're in a position like he was in to know I'm good at these things, but I'm not good at those things. And I need to partner with somebody that knows how to do those things. Like he always had really good bookers for the most part. He knew talent. He was good at spotting talent, but he wasn't good at manipulating talent or telling stories or doing the booking. He needed somebody for that. And he always went and the other thing I admired about Jim, or do admire about Jim, is that he's not the kind of guy looking for a Walmart discount. I mean, he's going to go out and get what he needs to get, and he's willing to pay for it. I admire that about. You can tell he's a real businessman.
Jim, right before he passed away, famously told Bruce Pritchard, "There's your guy," talking about John Cena.
Right.
He saw him and said, "That's your guy." And that's when there were backers for John, but they weren't sure. You don't know then. Before a guy gets that title the first time, you don't know how he's going to handle that spotlight on Bright and everything. And Barnett had not a doubt in his mind about it.
Right.
You know what he told me, John, in the very beginning when Cena first came? Cena used to wear that T-shirt during his matches a lot. Barnett called me one night after Raw, 11 o'clock at night. He had watched Raw. He said, "Tell John Cena to please take off that T-shirt. He's got such a body that people want to see it there. Tell him to take off that." I called John the next day. I said, "John, when you get to the ring, take off." And John started doing that. And he went up to Jim and thanked Jim in Atlanta TV shooting we were doing. He said, "Mr. Barnett, Brisco told me what you said." He said, "I really appreciate the feedback." He said, "I've taken it and I've changed my beginning of my act because of what you said there." So that's how I sued even in the later years that Barnett was.
Well, 20 years before that, he did the same thing with Tommy Rich. He saw Tommy Rich as this skinny guy from Nashville that most Ole probably wanted to use him in the opening match or the middle of the card, and Mr. Barnett goes, I see a star, and he was just good at that. He wasn't good at booking, but he was good at looking at talents and knowing who would draw money.
So Mr. Barnett was born, unfortunately, in a horrible place, and then left to greener pastures, right, Tony?
He was an Okie. He sure
was.
No,
God!
Yep, he sure
but
was.
As soon as he got a car, he left.
Well,
smart man.
He was born in the 30s or the 20s, and went to high school in Oklahoma City, went to junior high school in Oklahoma City. Mr. Brisco actually was familiar with Clawson because he's from that area. Clawson.
It's a working class school. So he didn't come up with all the, the story always was that Barnett's parents had started Pan American, helped start Pan American Airlines, and that's what gave him the money to get his education around various, depending on who you're talking, what university he actually went to. But Tony, of course, being the researcher he is, dug all that up there. So let's take after class of that, what,
1943, he graduated.
Graduated from Claxton High School and took off to Chicago to Northwestern or Chicago University.
University of Chicago. Yeah. So he went there to study theater because he wanted to write plays for a living. He wanted to be a playwright. Wow. And he always told the story that he was a Harvard graduate because he wanted people to believe in his business knowledge and background. And he actually told Fred Kohler, his guy, Dick Axman, that he interviewed with, that he had been a graduate from Harvard. But my good friend Tim Hornbaker, who's going to be honored at the upcoming Waterloo meeting, back in the mid-2000s, he told me that he had called Harvard. He called both admission offices, and they'd never had any record of Jim Barnett. So I don't think Harvard was actual part of his background, but he did graduate from the University of Chicago with a Bachelor of Philosophy degree. And he's very fascinated at the time with media because it's in the beginning years of television. And he's interested in marketing. He's interested in advertising. He ran the student newspaper there, which is how he came in contact with Fred Kohler and his office, was to get involved with them, do an interview or whatever. He went away.
Did you say he sent a letter to Kohler?
Yeah, well, he went away after he graduated from University of Chicago. He moved away, and I'm not sure where he went, but he went away for a little while. He moved back to Chicago. He got an apartment in Chicago, and he bought a television. And when he brought the television home, he found wrestling on TV, and he got fascinated with it, just loved it. So then he gets more interest in it, and he gets one of the publications from Fred Kohler's promotion and thinks it's terrible. He thinks it's awful, like they're doing a terrible job. So he writes a letter to Dick Axman, who's the publicity man for Kohler, and tells him his newsletter is terrible or his program is terrible, whatever it is. Like, this could be so much better. You got this great sport that's on television, and your stuff you're handing out to the people that are coming is awful. And Dick Axman says, well, if you think you can do better, why don't you come in here and give it a try? And Barnett goes, okay, I will. And he goes in there and he does a good job, and Axman gives him a job. And so Barnett starts editing their programs and their newsletter and everything for Fred Kohler. And Kohler sees he's ambitious. Kohler sees he's smart. He's willing to do whatever. And he starts elevating him, right? And what's interesting is he comes in at this time where wrestling on television is new. Television is new. Everybody's excited about it. It's hot as a firecracker. And Kohler is in this Chicago wrestling war with Leonard Schwartz. And they fell out and started this war with each other, which is what leads to that match we were talking about earlier.
And to give
let's go to TV. Go ahead, John.
To give people an indication of television and how much coverage it had at the time, there were 8,000 televisions I looked up in 1947. There were 45 million by 1960. There was 9% of the country in 1950 had TVs. 9%. 10 years later, 1960, it had the 90% in the country had it. So television was just about to explode. It's been around since the 20s, but it was just about to explode post-World War II.
Yep. I mean, though, the 1950s, I think, might be my favorite decade in professional wrestling because of television and because of all the promoters and because of the inner struggles and the drama and all that. Is just a really exciting time for the sport because it's growing like crazy. And everybody, it's almost like the Oklahoma and Texas land grab. You know, it's almost like they took all these promoters and go get as much territory as you can, you know, and they're in their covered wagons, like staking out their claim and shooting anybody that comes across the property line. And that's kind of what happened with Kohler and Schwartz there in Chicago.
Now you also mentioned to me that I didn't know that ABC was the fledgling network, that they had national TV too. Then Dumont Network comes along. I always thought it was the other way around. Am I wrong?
Well, ABC was first, and network at that time, like John said, it was available televisions, right? So it's whatever was out there, right? But Dumont, when they came along, I mean, they blew it wide open, and they were the network there for about 5 or 6 years. Well, until wrestling kind of tailed off there from 55, 56, 57, when wrestling started kind of being oversaturated and burned up the market and started to decline. I mean, it's almost like Andy Griffith and wrestling on TBS, right? You see the same scenario, right, where wrestling really drives it and really drives the growth.
So Uncle Milty was on one and wrestlers on the other one, and Uncle Milty got beat in the ratings.
Well, unfortunately, by the time the mid-50s comes, there's one Uncle Milty and there's 17 wrestling shows.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
And one thing I saw in your notes was this was the before Saturday Night's Main Event that happened in the 80s with Dick Ebersol on NBC. This was the last time that wrestling was on a national television network, right?
Yeah, so what happened was Leonard Schwartz owned the Rainbow Arena and Kohler was the promoter, right? Well, Schwartz triples his rent and tells him he's going to have to pay triple the rent to have the matches there. At the same time, Dumont signs on the air, and they get their growth going, and they're like, hey, you got this wrestling show, Wrestling from the Rainbow Arena. How about creating a wrestling show for our network? So now Kohler's going to have two wrestling shows coming out of Chicago, one from the Rainbow, which he's in this contentious partnership with Schwartz over, and he's going to have one when he moves over to the Marigold Arena. And Wrestling from the Marigold is the show that really takes off because it's on the Dumont Network. And that's one of the things that puts a big feather in Barnett's cap, because Barnett has the idea to syndicate Wrestling from the Marigold. And that was the last, it was on till I think 1956. And then when it went off the air, there was not another nationally broadcast wrestling show on a network until Saturday Night's Main Event in 1985.
This seems like an impossibility to me. You got Schwartz here who's got Wrestling at the Rainbow, and Kohler is the booker. And then all of a sudden, Kohler signs a deal with Dumont Network to put Wrestling at the Marigold in the same city, on television, on a bigger network. And he's the booker of both. I mean, that to me, like Schwartz, there's no way there's not a fallout here. I mean, was that the fallout? Was that he had started up? I don't see how it couldn't be.
So then Kohler, he stops sending talent to the Rainbow.
Of course he does. That's a natural progression.
Yeah, he stops sending talent to the Rainbow, and Schwartz says, okay, and some of this is going to be Mushnick's fault. All right, I'll tell you how this happens. So Schwartz sends off a letter to Mushnick, and it says, hey, Kohler is not sending me talent anymore for my arena. I need to join the NWA because then I can become a booker and I can book my own talent. And Mushnick goes, well, I can't do that because we only have one member office. And this is an important detail that a lot of people overlook. Territories were not members of the NWA. The NWA member was the booking office, and whoever owned the booking office, that was the member. This is going to come into play in LA here in a little bit, right? So Schwartz wants to join the NWA and open his own booking office so he can book his own talent into the Rainbow. And so Mushnick goes, I can't do that. We can only have one member booking office per city. That's in our bylaws, and we got to protect our membership because we're working together from this cooperative, and we can't have that inner competition. And so Schwartz goes, well, okay, then. And then in the letter that Mushnick sends back to Schwartz, there's a line in there where Mushnick says, just because you're not a member of the NWA doesn't mean you can't work with somebody in the NWA to get your talent. So Schwartz,
what a bunch of conniving douchebags.
Wow. So
every one of them.
So Schwartz reads that, and he goes to Al Haft in Ohio. And he goes, hey, I need talent. And Half goes, big booking fee. Going to send some talent into Chicago.
And get my talent over.
Yeah, that's right. Because my talent's going to be on Wrestling from the Rainbow, right? On the television show. And he goes, Kohler's going to be a little mad, but it's going to be money, and I'm going to get my guys over, and it's going to get, and when I get my guys over on the Wrestling at the Rainbow, I'm going to be able to book them out to other people in the country, and I'm going to make a lot of money here. So it's actually Ray Fabiani and Al Haft, but Al Haft is the booker. So Al Haft sends in a bunch of guys to Wrestling at the Rainbow, and on February the 3rd, 1950, They do 13,877 fans at Chicago Stadium for Schwartz, and they do a gate of $53,744.
Wow, this is what year now?
And
That's
who?
1950.
And I think this is the card, but I'm going to ask you because I don't want to give it away if it is. Who headlined that?
So that was Jim Londos and Primo Carnera.
And who both are about 80 years old at the time.
And they go an hour draw, one fall apiece.
You're kidding me.
Mm-mm.
How old was Londos at the time? Because his big run was in the early 30s, 20 years earlier.
Yeah, I don't know. I went back to Steve Johnson's book that you wrote the foreword for because I wanted to get some background on this, but he stops covering Londos kind of in the late 30s and 40s because his career for being a wrestler, and then he goes into his business stuff. But February 3rd, 1950, it's Londos and Carnera. They go up for a draw, one fall apiece with special referee Jack Dempsey.
Wow.
Holy cow.
Wow. And they draw 53 grand.
And Carnera, you know, his run as the champion was 15, 20 years earlier as well.
Right.
These are not young men. These are older guys. I mean, look, I'm not hating on them. It's just amazing that they were still such big draws. That tells you so much about Londos and Primo Carnera.
Well, I'm sure they probably put them on Wrestling at the Rainbow for a couple of weeks before this, right? And Schwartz knows it's going to draw because he goes to the stadium. He doesn't have them at the Rainbow. He does it at Chicago Stadium. And so on the second match from the top is Chief Don Eagle. He's on the undercard. And Kohler sees that. He's like, okay, you know, I got Don Eagle coming in, you know, for me here in a little bit to wrestle Gorgeous George. I'm going to take some stuff out on Don Eagle. And that's how the Chicago short count kind of happened.
This is just amazing to me that these guys, you know, Carnera was a pretty good worker. You know, he made more money in wrestling than he did in boxing, being the heavyweight champion, drawing it. And apparently his matches were no more legit in wrestling than they were in boxing. Because apparently, have you heard the same thing that Carnera may not have had one legit fight?
Yeah. He's not well spoke of by Luthez.
He was a good worker though. There's an old clip of him from 1937 or something on YouTube. Yeah. It's a great match. It's a great match. It's, you know, it's old school stuff, but it's like an 8-minute something. Carnera was a good heel. He was actually a good worker.
Now, you know, the downside of this is it looks like there's going to be a heck of a fight here, right? Because Schwartz is drawing this big crowd in 1950. He's got Wrestling with the Rainbow TV show. Kohler's got Wrestling at the Marigold. Kohler's kind of the big dog. And this is kind of the biggest that Schwartz's fire gets, right? He flames out kind of after this. And he starts.
You think that's a reason he kind of flamed out because he tried to go too big, or what?
I don't know. I mean, you see that a lot, you know, in wrestling where you hit a peak and then there's a dead time, you know, and then if you don't handle it right, that dead time can keep, you know, descending. But and I think too, a couple of things. One, like John said, there's this group of promoters that have all agreed they're going to stick with each other. They're going to stand by each other. They're going to help one another. But because of that powerful television that Schwartz has, they're willing to, you know, kind of overlook that and do what's best for them, right? And then the other thing kind of is that I think that drama and contention, I'm sure Mushnick's on the phone or firing off letters to these guys going, hey, you know, you guys need to cut it out. You know,
Mushnick was a notorious letter writer, by the way.
Oh, yeah, Mushnick gave him the blueprint.
He did. That one line in there, just because you're not a member of the NWA doesn't mean you can't work with us.
Mushnick started this whole thing. This whole thing started because of Mushnick.
He did. Yeah. He talked too much there.
Yeah.
No, he didn't. He talked exactly what he wanted to talk because he was probably getting booking fees somewhere down the line come to him.
So this whole thing causes Kohler to fire off a letter, right? He fires off a letter to Mushnick, and he goes, okay, I've had it. We're supposed to be working together. We're supposed to be, you know, supporting one another. And Al Haft, and he's working with that Ray Fabiani and that notorious Jack Pfeffer, and they're booking guys in here. And I'm in his letter, he goes, I'm resigning from the NWA for obvious reasons. And so then Schwartz goes, hey, Kohler's resigned. I guess that means the NWA now is open in Chicago. So here's my membership application. And they take it. They take Schwartz's application. He becomes a member. And then later on, about 6 months or 8 months, when Kohler's comes back, to his senses, and he's not fired up and mad, he goes, hey, I made a mistake. I kind of want back in. Well, they let him back in too. So then,
when they let him back in, what they do with Schwartz?
They let them both in. They both got to keep it.
They broke their own bylaws.
Yeah, they both got to keep it.
What a corrupt bunch of dudes.
So not the NWA.
No, not the hallowed NWA.
So there's more to this story. So they accept Schwartz's application. Kohler comes to his senses. He then comes back and goes, hey, I messed up. I want to be back in. I love you guys. You need to take me back. Mushnick goes, okay, I'll put it back to the members. And the member goes, well, it's not what we normally do, but Kohler, we need him because it's
against their bylaws, actually.
Yeah. But we need him because he's got this wrestling on the Dumont Network, and he's got this wrestling on the Marigold, and we've got talent. We need to be on his television. We are going to let him in, and we're not going to kick Schwartz out because he's got powerful television, and we want to get our guys on there too. So isn't there some way we can all get along and have two members in Chicago? Yeah. And they don't get along, but they do have two members in Chicago.
So what year was this with when Don Eagle was there and you had Carnera and Jim Londos headline? What year was it?
1950.
1950. Okay, yep. I just looked it up. Londos was born in 1897, so 53 years old, which back then was significantly past.
Yeah. And he probably was in immaculate shape too.
No, I wouldn't doubt that at all. He was probably still a best performer in the world. I wouldn't doubt that either. But when you talk about how he doesn't have much to follow back up with it, talking about Schwartz, that seems like the reason. You drew a huge crowd because of two famous names, but you've got nothing underneath to follow it.
That are not going to do a program. That was a one shot.
You didn't build those names. You poached those names. And you put Londo's name on anything, especially against Carnera with Jack Dempsey, even at 53 years old, he draws a hell of a house. But he just didn't have much to follow up on it seems like.
It sounds to me like, Tony, that TV was used more so to get the talent over than to actually create angles
because those talent guys were working all over the country.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you now. It seems like the NWA has their guys, and you mentioned, well, they got Amerigo TV. We can use. Were these guys contracted to Sam or Fred or
they were contracted to the booking office.
To the booking office. So they could only work exclusively. And is there any record of what kind of money that the networks were paying out at that time, or how it filtered down to the talent?
Yeah, I haven't really found. We talked about that the other night in St. Louis. I've been looking for that, but I haven't found it yet. But so. For example, if Roy Welch, Roy didn't, let's see, if Sam Mushnick wanted to run at the Keel in St. Louis and he wanted Gorgeous George, that's a bad example because he wouldn't have booked Gorgeous, but he would have had to contact Johnny Doyle, right? If he wanted Vern Gagne in St. Louis, he would have had to contact Kohler. So the booking offices control the talent, and we didn't really start getting programs and angles until we got into studio wrestling, because the studio wrestling made things more local and customized, and that's when the booking got more local and customized too.
Before we get into studio wrestling, I want to ask you about Gorgeous George.
Oh yeah, we're a ways away from it yet. I blew the lid off there.
No. That's a natural progression. But Gorgeous George, I'm the biggest Gorgeous George fan in the world. I think he's probably the greatest heel of all time, at least in my opinion. Mm-hmm. They said he sold more TV sets than Milton Berle. They called them Georgie sets. They sold so much. What was the progression? Now I mentioned, the amount of TVs. In 1947, 8,000 TVs. At 1950, 9% of the country had. Then by 1960, there was 90%. This massive explosion. What was the progression of George as far as television? Was most of his television, did it come out of California, or did it come out of the Dumont Network?
No, Gorgeous was on Hollywood Wrestling, which Johnny Doyle and Cal Eaton were booking. And
did Johnny Doyle, was he the one that built him up?
Yeah. Yeah. He's
Wow.
Gorgeous George was under contract to Johnny Doyle's booking office,
Mm.
And
which
most
I'm
of, and
gonna.
the,
So
his fame and
I'm
his
going to
fame
talk
and
about
fortune,
the booking fees here in a minute. Sorry,
Yeah,
John.
go
Go
ahead.
but
ahead.
his fame and fortune came out of Johnny Dole's brain and got him on TV in California. And
That's
then all of
right.
a sudden, Gorgeous George becomes this household name in the early 50s and probably, well, the biggest star. They said he made as much as Joe DiMaggio one year, and Joe DiMaggio was the highest paid athlete in the country next to Gorgeous George.
So after Chicago, you had Los Angeles had a network broadcast called Hollywood Wrestling coming out of L.A., and then you had Dallas had Texas Wrestling coming out of Dallas, and those were the three main. And that's where Buddy Rogers got over. Buddy
Was in
Rogers got
Texas?
over being in Texas and being on Texas Wrestling. Gorgeous George got over on Hollywood Wrestling. Vern Gagne got over on wrestling at Marigold. So you had
And somebody that we're leaving out of this equation is that guy out in Washington, D.C. They had a little national TV going at the
yeah,
time.
they sure did. They came along a little bit later.
That was Vince Senior and his partners, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we'll get there, but eventually Johnny Doyle books that for a while.
Wow.
So Schwartz gets the NWA thing in Chicago, and even the fact that they even considered it made Kohler go off the edge, right? So he resigns, comes back, and they take him back. So that's kind of how that Chicago war. Now the guy sitting there watching all this is Jim Barnett, right? He's watching how all this is happening, how these guys are doing this or whatever, and Barnett starts working with Kohler and figuring out how the booking's done and the talent management. And he eventually takes over that. Jim Barnett eventually, he's the guy that books the talent, manages the talent, recruits the talent, puts the talent under contract. He's the guy that manages the syndication from the Dumont Network. And Barnett actually starts going out on the road. And because Kohler runs places outside Chicago, right? He runs Denver and a couple other places. And Barnett goes on these road trips and he sees how the tickets are sold. He sees how the fans are treated. He sees how the newsletter gets to the thing, and he's working with the arena managers and forming these relationships. And before long, people start thinking Jim Barnett's actually the guy that's running things, right? Because Kohler's kind of a background dude. He's not somebody that's out front a whole lot. Kohler starts going to the background. Barnett starts going to the front in publicity. And so all these articles that come out about this new superstar smart guy in wrestling is all Jim Barnett.
Wow. And to get back, I don't know if we're going backward a little bit or about the same time to the Don Eagle screw job.
Mm-hmm.
We had Don Eagle as the semi-main event on the match with Londos and Carnera with Jack Dempsey as the referee and 13,000 people there. That's when you have get mad and drop out of the NWA. And then they bring in Don Eagle. And that's when the screw job happens, right?
Right. That's when Kohler punishes Don Eagle for being on the opposition card.
Now, Don Eagle, a little bit of background. Don Eagle had just won the AWA title, right?
The Bowser one. Yeah. The one from East Coast.
And he had come in with the AWA title.
Yep.
Kohler puts him on right after all this happens with this huge card. He brings in the undercard because he's not going to bring in Londos and Carnera. So he brings in the one guy who has a chance of being the future, brings in Don Eagle, puts him against Gorgeous George, and then what happens?
Yeah, so he does the Chicago short count. The referee counts him. His shoulder's not even down on the 3 count. He
not even close.
Yeah, no, he gives him the fast count. And these guys are just wandering around the ring here for a minute, like somebody just threw cold water in their face. Like they don't understand Gorgeous George doesn't understand what happened. All of a sudden he's the champion. He doesn't plan on being the champion. He doesn't want to be the champion, And so they essentially gave the belt back to Eagle in the locker room, and he went on about his schedule and did his next date as the champion.
And something funny about it,
but all these people that were watching television thought they saw a title change,
right.
And
so it's something that we talked about. We went over the whole video of it and watched the whole match and everything. It was so much fun. It was almost exactly Shawn Michaels' response in Montreal was Gorgeous George's response.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at it, you're going, wait a minute, it looks identical, and so you don't know if it's legit, not legit. You're just sitting there looking at it going, which I don't care. I love the mystique of it. And I love the intrigue, but it's really interesting to see how Gorgeous George responded because you don't really know. Now, history makes it look like Gorgeous George probably wasn't in on it because he didn't do anything with the belt. He just gave it back, and he didn't really,
Well, I was just about to say your mental bias on Shawn Michaels is not, you can't trust it because you've heard so many stories about it that you don't really know if he's in on it or not. But I'm really dang sure looking at that video, Gorgeous George wasn't in on it. He didn't know anything. Like his response, was that. And Kohler, knowing him, studying his life and character and all, he just basically worked a deal with the referee.
That's amazing. You do a screw job and you don't let any of the two performers in, if that's indeed what happened, because obviously Don Eagle wasn't in on it, but George was the one that could have been or might not have been, but it looks like he probably wasn't.
Well, what's weird about that whole match is the fact that Don Eagle, like, it disappears for a little bit. Like he's gone and his dad's in the ring, and you're like, what's going on here? And there's an obvious edit there. There's an edit. You can tell that jumps a little bit, and then all of a sudden Eagle's back in the ring. And I don't know what happened in between that,
Yeah. And Don Eagle had a lot of tough times after this. I mean, his trajectory was not up. It looked like it was going up at the time, but after this screw job, I don't know if it has anything to do with that or not, but his career did not take off like they thought it would, right?
No, that kind of that put a damper on it for sure. It sure did.
And so it seemed like whatever Kohler was doing was effective.
Yeah. No, he got his point across, and he was you guys said in the video, it looks like Fred Kohler's the only one that was the winner here, and I'm like, yeah, he was, and he did it for a reason. He was proving a point. Like he sent the message with Don Eagle to all the talent: if you go and work for Schwartz, and then you come here to my TV, you just don't know what's going to happen. So you're better off not working for Schwartz. That's the message. And Don Eagle was the guy he had to take it out on to get that across.
And Dumont was just that much bigger than what they had at the Marigold, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was the Marigold was, or the Rainbow.
Rainbow.
Yeah. The Rainbow was powerful. It was on ABC, but it wasn't the Dumont. I mean, the Dumont was the big daddy.
And how long did the Dumont stay in power?
Almost to 60, I think.
Wow.
I can't remember for sure. I was just kind of focused in on how long the wrestling was on there. It's been a long time since I've studied the Dumont, but it didn't last much into the 60s.
Not to digress. And then
the big three kind of took over.
Not to digress, because I want to get to Jim Barnett, but Gorgeous George, he was a draw. He wasn't a draw everywhere, right? He was a draw in most places, a huge draw, right?
It depended on how the promoters presented wrestling. Like Mushnick wouldn't have had anything to do with them. Amarillo didn't have anything to do with them. They were just like, he's not legit enough for us with the gimmick, right? And funny thing is, George really was legit as a performer, as a wrestler, right? But the gimmick didn't come across as being legitimate. It came across as exposing the business, and some promoters didn't go for that. I mean, Sam was very strict on that stuff. He wouldn't even let what was it? Who's our friend? If there was a big star in the AWA that did the German gimmick, Baron Raschke.
Baron von Raschke,
yeah, he wouldn't even let him call himself the Baron, in St. Louis.
Really?
He just called him von Raschke.
Von Raschke, yeah.
Yeah, Yusef Ismail at the turn of the century, one of the greatest heels of all time. I mean, it's not like the business didn't have characters.
Oh, right. But certain promoters wouldn't. I mean, Terry Funk got on the edge with Mushnick a few times in St. Louis, just the things he was doing in the ring, and it cost Dick Murdoch a chance at the NWA title.
Yeah,
I mean, Dick Murdoch was in St. Louis and did the curly shuffle thing around or whatever, and that Sam was kind of done because he was.
As soon as Dick turned into a clown, that's when Sam got off with Dick. I remember.
Yeah, Sam was really bringing Murdoch in and thinking. Because the thing
he was going to be the Dick. Actually, I think the thought was they could turn him into a Dick the Bruiser type guy.
Yeah. If you had a chance at all at the NWA title, you had to work St. Louis a fair amount. And a lot of times you got the Missouri title before you got the world title. And so he was bringing Murdoch in, and he turned into that. We've all seen it, what Dick does. And
I tagged with him. I saw it several times from about 3 feet away.
And that Sam's vote went away right there.
When Murdoch felt like doing that, he would just do it. He would do that curly go whoop 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 whoop, and he'd do that circle around and thing. You've seen him do it. It was hilarious.
And I don't know if it was specifically that, but it was something like that where he did something kind of weird outside the ring or something, and that kind of did him in with Sam.
Jim Cornette said about Dick Murdoch, he said Murdoch is to wrestling what a trick shot artist is to pull.
That's probably true. I can see that.
He can get there, but he gets there in the damnedest ways you've ever seen. And that was Dick. Dick was so talented that sometimes he would go, instead of going straight somewhere, he'd go like loop, 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 and end up there. And just because he wanted to show he could do it,
so this might get the point across. Like, so if you have a spectrum of wrestling, and the guy that's primarily known as the consummate St. Louis wrestler is Lou Thez, and Gorgeous George is over here, right? And so that's not all. Some promoters leaned over here, and he was too far over here for him, But he was perfect for television to get audience, So not always in the house shows did the promoters want that, but he was great for television.
Yeah. So Barnett's kind of sitting in the background at this time, watching all these incidents occur. When did he really start stepping out of that shadow and into the limelight?
Not long. I mean, by 52. So this thing with Schwartz and Kohler was going on at its height in 50, and probably by 52, Barnett is really he's the director of operations, basically. I mean, he's in charge of everything that's going on with the promotion. Kohler still owns it. Kohler's still the main guy. But Barnett, from the outside looking in, it looks like Barnett's slowly but surely taken over because he's the one out in the public. He's the one working with the boys.
He's making all these contacts with the buildings and with the
television people.
And that just falls right into Jim Zill, as I've discussed with John several times when he brought me in. That's what he taught me, John. I've talked to you about that. You get to the building managers. You learn. He always introduced. I've told you this many times. He always introduced me to the building managers. When we had a TV executive, he was always introduced me to the TV, to Jack and I, because he wanted our name out there a lot. And that's kind of like Jim is he knew that program, how to get you involved there. And that was my asset that I brought to the table when Vince hired me. Was what I learned off of Jim Barnett.
So you guys, for my regular job, know that I work with executives, right? I'm an executive coach and advisor. Right. I have a section that I work with them on called Building Your Power Base. And that's what Jim was doing. He was, if I work with a CEO, for example, here in Columbia that's centrally located in Jefferson City, the capital, just down the road, I'm like, how many calls can you make to get to the governor? How many calls can you make to get to your state rep? How many calls can you make to get to your senator? Well, Jim got to the point where he could just call them direct, right? He's building his power base, not just with the building managers, not just with the media executives, but with the political people in those areas. He was getting to know, if he was going to Denver for a house show, he probably was working his way to learn about the governor of Colorado, right? He's solidifying his power with all the different people that have to do with wrestling.
Jim was all about power, basically, what we're saying here.
Yeah.
Jim was all about power.
He was really good at it, too. He was a great, good networker.
Probably in our business, probably the best ever that had the connection. I can't think of anybody that I've worked with that any better than Jim.
So in 1950, from 50 to 52 and 53, this is what's going on. Schwartz gets admitted. Kohler comes back in 53. Barnett is rising up 50, 51, 52, 53 to where he's pretty much running the operations out of Chicago. Over on the West Coast in Los Angeles, let's go over there and talk about that for a minute. So this lady named Eileene LaBelle, she's really born Eileen Goldstein.
Okay, the LaBelle name, is that?
Yeah,
we all know Jane and was that
Mike. Yeah,
Mike.
Yep. So Eileene LaBelle, she's from Canada. She's born in Vancouver, but her parents they wintered in Los Angeles to get away from Vancouver, but they eventually moved to Los Angeles. Eileene goes to high school in Los Angeles and marries this guy named Maurice LaBelle. He's the father of Mike LaBelle and Jean LaBelle. And she goes to work in a law office. Her husband passes away. He's in a near drowning accident, and it cripples him. And her oldest son, Mike, got sick. So she quit college and went to work for a accounting firm, and she's going to law school at night. Well, eventually she runs out of finances. Her husband passes away. She has no insurance. So she decides to go into the advertising business. And she sends off the two boys, Mike and Gene, to California Military Academy because they will at least have a place for the boys to live, a place for them to sleep. This is how bad their economic situation is, right? And so she starts opening up this little advertising agency. And so for the boys to go to the military academy, she starts handling their advertising for free. So the boys can go to school and have a place to live, and she takes care of their marketing and advertising. And she starts building accounts and getting different accounts and this, that, and the other. Well, she gets the account for the Los Angeles Athletic Club. The Los Angeles Athletic Club owns the Olympic Auditorium where wrestling takes place. And eventually she works her way up to become the accountant and bookkeeper for the Olympic Auditorium. Over here on the other side, we got a guy named Cal Eaton. Cal Eaton was an inspector for the California Athletic Commission. He works for this powerful entity that regulates boxing and wrestling in Los Angeles. Well, when they need a manager and promoter for the Olympic, he's recommended by Eileene LaBelle. She goes, I know a guy. It works for the athletic commission. His name is Cal Eaton, and he's the guy that you need to hire. Well, when Eaton is hired to take over the Olympic, their boxing profits went anywhere from $900 to $1,200 a show to $11,000 a show. Like, that's how good he is. Plus, he's connected to the commission, right? He used to be one of their guys. So he kind of knows how to work the system. He knows how to promote stuff. They have a fight at the Olympic. The Henry Armstrong and John Thomas fight at the Olympic draws $42,000. That's in 1942, right?
Wow.
Well, you kind of can connect the dots here because Eileene recommends this guy nobody's ever heard of before that works for the commission. How does she know him? Well, in 1947, Cal Eaton's wife files for divorce and claims mental cruelty. She gets 40 grand. And then 6 months later, guess who gets married? Cal Eaton and Eileene LaBelle get married.
Wow.
And she becomes Eileene Eaton then, right? And so they start promoting boxing and wrestling at the Olympic Auditorium, and they grow this business. Well, over in the booking side of things, we got a guy by the name of Johnny Doyle. And Johnny...
Important name. Remember that name, Johnny Doyle.
Yeah, Johnny Doyle worked for a guy named Ray Fabiani in Philadelphia. Well, then he moves into L.A., and how'd that go again? So the California Athletic Commission, they regulated wrestling and boxing in California, and they passed a law that said that promoters could be licensed and bookers could be licensed, but you couldn't do both, right? So Johnny Doyle has this booking office in Los Angeles that books the talent, and Cal and Eileene Eaton have this promotion at the Olympic that promotes the events. And on the down low, Doyle actually gets percentage points in the promotion that he's not supposed to have, right?
Of course.
Yep.
Of course.
Yeah. So there's a letter that we found from 1941 when Doyle has been there for like a year, and he writes a letter back to Jack Pfeffer. It's in the Pfeffer collection at Notre Dame, and Doyle is bragging about how great the crowds are and how much their money they're making, and he says, man, I'm going to have a lot of headaches here, and the headaches I'm going to have is from drinking all this champagne from all this money we're making. And so he says business is bad everywhere except here in Southern California. And so they have a minority partner named Jim Londos. There's that name again. He's involved in this too. So essentially what happened was the Darrows, who were the promoters in Los Angeles, along with Toots Mondt, they controlled it, right? The California Athletic Commission kind of phased them out and phased the Eatons and Doyle in. They basically transferred the wrestling monopoly from one group to another group.
Wow.
So much back then was just based on connections, right? Like
right.
William Muldoon in New York. You had guys that come along that they are very autocratic. They're very very dictatorial, and you get in with them. Obviously, something's going up the chain with a little bit of cash going up the chain. All of a sudden, you have a monopoly on all of the wrestling, and that's what it looked like that LaBelle had with Johnny Doyle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we were talking about talent earlier. So by 1950, so now we're back to 1950 again, same time this is going on in Chicago, Johnny Doyle is representing about 98% of the professional wrestlers in California. Wow. He's got Gorgeous George. He's got Baron Michelle Leone. He's got Primo Carnera. He's got Antonino Rocca. He's got Mr. Moto. He's got Wilbur Snyder. I mean, he's got a roster, and he's controlling that. In 1950, they go on NBC KNBH Channel 4, which was the NBC network affiliate in Hollywood, and they eventually turned that show into Hollywood Wrestling, which gets syndicated across the country, which makes Gorgeous George.
Which makes Gorgeous George, and also their wrestling. But then Johnny Doyle does he become like he wants to do more? Does he become bored? What happened? And he looked like he had such a good deal in Southern California.
So
Why would he ever end up leaving that?
So the same thing kind of happened to him that happened to Schwartz. So Johnny Doyle is the superstar booker in the National Wrestling Alliance, because remember, to be a member of the NWA, you're a booking office, right? Well, the guys that place the talent. Johnny Doyle is the superstar booker. Like, everybody thinks he's the smartest thing since sliced bread. He's awesome. He's got Gorgeous George. He's on television. He's, selling all these televisions and making all this money. 1952, May the 1st, they draw professional wrestling's first $100,000 gate in Los Angeles. Lou Thez defending the NWA World Title against Baron Michelle Leone at Gilmore Field. And Eileene Eaton is quoted in the newspaper there. There's a newspaper article. She says, "I've got 10 accountants working under me in the promotion, and they're all women." And she says, "I am the ticket supervisor for the promotion, and I handle $1.5 million in tickets a year," in 1952.
Wow. That's unbelievable territory.
Yeah.
And that's just Los Angeles and, San Diego and just right around in that, a little bit of Nevada. And so they're cutting a wide swath. So this is kind of what happens is Doyle is like on top of the world. And actually the 1952 NWA convention, you know where it's held? Santa Monica, California, because they're going to have the convention where the superstar booker lives.
Right.
And he's the toast of the NWA convention in 1952. Everybody comes to bow down at the throne of Johnny Doyle. I mean, he's the man. And so what happens when these guys start having success, you think, between Doyle and the Eatons? What do you think starts happening when they're making all this money?
Someone has to encroach on it. Yeah. Someone has to get paid.
Somebody's coming in.
Somebody's jealous. Somebody's upset. Somebody thinks their points should be more, or somebody thinks their points should be less, this, that, and the other. Well, 1953, Johnny Doyle takes his booking office out of the Olympic Auditorium. He moves his offices. So even though they're licensed separately and separate entities, they're in the same building. They're right down the hall from each other, right? But they booked this big card in 52. Well, in March of 53, Doyle goes, "Yeah, I'm moving my office." Well, why do you think? You just got tired of driving to the Olympic every day, or you just got tired of the carpeting, or what's the deal? Because in the newspaper, he goes, "This has nothing to do with any difference of opinion I might have with the Eatons. I just decided to have a new location." All the wrestlers live on the west side of town. It would be a lot easier and more convenient for them to come to my office if I move out.
So he's putting a stake in the ground against the Eatons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was his plan?
I don't know. But from that point on, business starts going down. Eaton's wife files for divorce. They've been married 22 years. She's like, Johnny's gone for more than a week at a time. I don't know where he's at. He won't tell me anything. Every time I ask him, he tells me it's none of my business. And she claims that, the housekeeper says, yeah, there's all kinds of girls calling here that I never heard of before. And I don't know who they are or whatever. And so what's interesting is in the divorce, his wife wants to have custody of their 8-year-old son. And the 8-year-old son's name, John Michael Doyle. Well, 40% of the booking office is in the name of John Michael Doyle, the 8-year-old kid. So that all comes out, that somehow or another, some of the percentage of the booking office is double dipped by Johnny because he's got his kid as one of the major stockholders. There's an incident in 53 where there's an actress named Catherine Monroe, and Johnny beats her up because he's trying to come on to her or whatever, and she doesn't want him to, and he ends up, socking her and knocking her out, and that costs him $2,500. So,
wow.
Yeah. So less than 2 years after he's the most celebrated and most talented, powerful booker in the National Wrestling Alliance, this is the guy that booked the Thez Leone program. This is the guy that drew the biggest gate of the 1950s, is now decided and announced he will be selling all his ownership to Cal Eaton and leaving Los Angeles. And he's going to go work for Toots Mondt, and he's going to book Madison Square Garden in New York City.
Now, was Toots with Vince Sr. at the time?
No, Vince Sr. still in Washington, and Toots is still the promoter in New York. And so Johnny's going to go work for him. And
Johnny did not have a lot of success in the Garden, right?
No, nobody did. Which is how Vince Sr. eventually got in. But yeah, they didn't have good business at the time. And Johnny didn't turn it around.
Where did Barnett and Doyle meet up? Where's their connection?
They met at the 1952 NWA convention in Santa Monica, as a matter of fact, because Barnett was building his power base, and Johnny Doyle's the most powerful booker. And probably the second most powerful booker in the NWA is Mr. Barnett, because he's booking all these guys on the Dumont Network, and he's booking all these guys in Chicago. So these guys, instead of repelling, jealousy, and I don't have anything to do with that guy because, he's my rival, they actually get together and have a good relationship. And Doyle gets outside of Los Angeles. He doesn't have very good success at Madison Square Garden. It's something I tell people all the time. You can't read the label from inside the bottle. Like once he gets outside Los Angeles, he looks back at Los Angeles. He goes, I probably made a mistake there, and I want to go back. What
was the issue of the Garden? Was it the Pfeffer's expose or what was it?
I think that was part of it. I think it was just business was down, there, which is weird because in the 1950s, everywhere else.
What talent did they have?
I don't know, Jerry. I'm not sure.
That's the problem. You can't name any of them.
Yeah, that might be right too. That might be right too.
Hey, let me ask you a quick question, because while I think about it, Hans Schmidt and Vern Gagne were you could say were the second biggest draw in the 50s. Who was first?
Thez.
And who was Thez's biggest rival that he drew with?
This probably had something to do with it here, Baron Michel Leone, but I can't remember right now, John. But yeah. I do remember Vern Gagne and Hans Schmidt because I just read that book on Vern Gagne, and it was in there about them being the second drawings program in the 50s.
Yeah. So when does the official tie-up with Barnett and Johnny Doyle get together?
So they
super team when they do.
Yeah. So there's a couple more things that happen here. So Doyle's outside looking in, and he decides, I'm going to go back to, California, but I'm not going to partner up. I'm just going to go back at it. And so he decides the way to do that is to go into Las Vegas and go into Los Angeles. So he gets television contracts, and he gets a television contract in Las Vegas, and he gets a television contract with a station in Los Angeles. And he's going to start having shows there. But because he's kind of out now of the business, he doesn't have any talent. So he's got to go get his talent. So he goes to Mr. Barnett. And he goes, Jimsy, I need guys for Los Angeles, and I need guys. So I'm going to start out in Vegas, and once I get Vegas going, then I'm going to go to Los Angeles. And so he schedules a show for, I believe, September of 55. Well, then the NWA 1955 convention happens, and this is a really important convention. The first thing is because the DOJ investigation, and they're being investigated for being a monopoly. Sam Mushnick.
Who files that suit though? Let's enlighten us on that.
The Department of Justice.
Okay.
Yeah, the government. You know, they've got the.
Who alerted them that it's a monopoly?
Yeah, so we'll get there, right? So Sam Mushnick opens up the 1955 convention by saying, "We got this situation with the Department of Justice, so I want to open it up for all our membership. I want to know if you want to continue with the NWA or do you want to dissolve it?" And he takes a vote, and they vote unanimously 38-0 to keep going.
Of course they do.
So
they got their hand in the company till.
I think I put this in my notes, and I want to mention it here, is in 1948, there were 6 guys, and they basically got together to have a world title in Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and now they've grown from 6 guys to 38 guys. And not just 38 guys in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. I mean, this thing has exponentially grown in 7 years. And so there's a 38-0 vote to keep going. Fred Kohler gets up. He's the chairman of, let me run down the important chairman of this meeting here. So Sam Avey is there. Sam Avey is Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he's the chairman of the World Junior Championship Committee. And Ed Francis is the World Junior Champion at this time, and they introduce Ed Francis to everybody. They gave him the title in the 54 meeting. Joe Malkowitz, who is the promoter in Booker in San Francisco, is the chairman of the World Heavyweight Championship Committee. Lou Thez, who's just won his 4th world title, is there, and he introduces him. And Sam Mushnick interrupts and says, "I just want to know why," after Lou is introduced and Malkowitz is introduced as the chairman of the championship committee, Sam Mushnick goes, "I am flooded every day with complaints about Lou, and none of you will say anything to him." Like, why will you not talk about in this meeting when we're all together? Why won't you talk about the problems you're having with him? Because you won't stop talking about it to me, and I'm wore out with it. And I'll do one of 2 things. I'll either continue being your president and booking the world champion, but I'm not going to do both anymore. And I'm going to need 15 grand to do one of those things.
Wow.
Right? So then they move on. Dave Reynolds.
Wait. Let's don't move on. What were the complaints about Lou?
That sometimes he complained the whole time he was there because because the town was too small, or because he was booked too many times in a row, or because he was supposed to get a week off at the end of the month and he never gets it. The things that he would be saying to Sam, he's also saying to everybody else. But none of the promoters want to get with Sam and challenge him on it, right? Those kinds of things. So Dave Reynolds, you ever heard that name?
No.
Dave Reynolds, he is the booker in Salt Lake City, and he's the chairman of the television committee. And so in 1951, the NWA forms this committee because this big booming thing is happening called television. So they decide they need to have a television committee to monitor to see what's going on. this is going to play in later on. Toots Mott is there, and Toots is the booker in New York City, and he's the chairman of the membership committee. Who else? Salvador Luderoth is there. He's the chairman of the World Light Heavyweight Championship Committee, because the World Light Heavyweight Champion was booked out of Mexico City, right? So Fred Kohler is the chairman of the Grievance Committee. And guess who has the biggest grievance at the convention? Leonard Schwartz. Leonard Schwartz in Chicago, right? Because these guys are at each other, right? So Fred gets up to give his report from the Grievance Committee, and he says, I just want to announce to everybody that it's been brought up to my attention that Johnny Doyle is coming into Las Vegas and Los Angeles, and starting on October 1st, I will no longer be supplying him with talent. And based on a grievance that's been filed by Cal Eaton in Los Angeles. And as a trade-off, Cal has promised not to run any more shows in Colorado against me and no more shows in New Mexico. And if anybody breaks any of these deals, they will be expelled from the National Wrestling Alliance.
So this meeting basically proves the entire DOJ point on a monopoly.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. So Leonard Schwartz gets up, and Leonard Schwartz says, I really kind of want out of Chicago. He says, because, yeah, we had a good deal going there for a while, but it's tailed off, and I really kind of want to exit. So, Fred, why don't you let me buy Indianapolis, Indiana, and Rockford, Illinois? And, you know, let me have those two towns, and I'll get out of Chicago. And Kohler just says, noted. That's his response.
Yeah.
Then,
That's always the shittiest response ever when a person says noted. You're like, okay, you're a dick.
Then after a minute or two, he goes, tell you what, give me a little bit of time to get Indianapolis up and running before I sell it to you, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
This is straight mafia.
So his
monopoly.
So his idea of getting Indianapolis up and running is to send Mr. Barnett there. Right? So now I want to bring this up too, because it has to do with television. So members are upset because Kohler and Barnett are promoting Vern Gagne as the NWA United States television champion. And this is one of the frustrating things about being president of the NWA, is that Mushnick has to continually remind these guys what they agreed to, right? Sure. And so in 1953, they all agreed to this. They all agreed, because Lou would never put Vern over to give him a championship run. They came up with the idea of giving him the United States championship. And they thought, well, television is really hot, so why don't we call him the United States television champion? Well, every year he has to remind them that they agreed to do this, right? And what they're upset about is the United States television championship is now overshadowing the World Heavyweight Championship, and Vern is overshadowing Lou, and that they think that's hurting their draw with Lou when he comes in, because Vern's on this big, media giant, and he's getting all this attention, and they think calling him the television champion is putting even a bigger shine on it, which it probably is.
What was Lou's problem with Vern?
Thought he was too small. He thought he and that's why at first they gave him.
Why they made him junior heavyweight.
At first they gave Vern the junior heavyweight championship. That was the first concession to the thing. But then when things moved on, well, then they gave him the United States championship, and then they put television on it because television was hot. Well, this is in 55. Well, by 56, Leonard Schwartz out of everything. He's got bad health problems. He doesn't pay his dues. He kills his membership in the NWA. Mushnick at the 56 convention says Leonard Schwartz is taking a leave of absence, and we hope that he can come back and be a promoter really soon. And he never shows up again. He just kind of drops out of history at that point.
But that's when Barnett, though, got down to Indianapolis and popped that territory there.
That's right. So
who did he pop it with? I mean, what was the talent?
Dick the Bruiser. So not only does he get Indianapolis to run, he actually gets Indianapolis as a full partner. So he puts Barnett and Kohler are 50-50 partners in Indianapolis then. And he did get it up and running. I mean, strongly. Right. And actually, we're kind of to the point about studio wrestling now, because in Indianapolis is the place where Barnett's just doing what he knows to do, right? Which is a remote production truck comes out to the arena, a big television crew comes in.
Did they have a set arena like the Marigold or
yeah, in Indianapolis? Yeah, they sure did. They had a large arena. And he just did there what they had always done in Chicago, which is the television guys would show up with the production truck, and they'd have to move these big, heavy cameras in there, and it would take, several.
Now, the people that really don't visualize, you see these big cameras, they had these gigantic platforms on them with rollers on them, and they had to roll them around everywhere. Those things probably weighed 700 to 800 pounds.
And they were really sensitive, so the guys had to treat them with kid gloves, right? And so they're bringing them to these remote shoots, and it takes 10 or 12 guys to run this production. It takes guys on sound. It takes guys on television. Wow. It takes floor directors to show them, what they need to do and all of that. Well, one day the production truck breaks down and they can't come to the arena. And Barnett goes, well, we'll just take the ring to the TV station. Yeah. So he tells the ring crew, take the ring to the television station. Well, they get there. They set it up in this little studio. They got about 40, 50 people in there. And Barnett goes, this would be a lot cheaper and easier. Like, it would be a lot less expensive. We don't have to have this big crew of people from the TV. All we need is like 3 or 4 people. And it's easy. Maybe even we can talk to him about leaving the ring here. Maybe we won't have to take the ring in and out. And so it sort of was fortuitous that a ring truck or a television production truck broke down, and that's kind of how he did that. And then before long, other people are doing it too. I think Mr. Crockett in the Carolinas might be the next guy. Portland, actually.
We're talking Jim Sr.
Yeah, Jim Crockett Sr. He started a show in Greenville, South Carolina, I think, that lasted maybe 3 months in 55 or 56. But like a lot of other familiar promoters we know, he didn't really get going until 59, 60, somewhere around in there. Portland Wrestling was on about that same time as Barnett, too. I think Portland Wrestling is the longest running regular show up until they went out of business.
Now, that's where Selm got the idea at that time to do the wrestling at the Chase, or Selm not to come speaking of, or how did that come about?
Well, what's interesting is that Munchnick is talking to, well, let's talk about Johnny Doyle and Jim Barnett.
Okay.
So after Vegas and Los Angeles don't play out, and after Barnett goes and buys Indianapolis, Johnny Doyle goes back to work for Vince McMahon Sr. in Washington, D.C. And it's kind of a complicated deal. We won't go into it all, but they had a deal where Edouard Carpentier was the world champion in the East for a while and in Omaha. And Johnny Doyle is booking him, and he's booking him, and they're drawing. They're drawn really, really well. So he's kind of starting to work his way back on top again. Well, after a while, then Barnett talks Mr. Kohler into selling his half of Indianapolis to Johnny Doyle. And so at the end of 1958, Doyle buys out Kohler's interest in Indiana wrestling, becoming partners with Barnett. And Barnett had been there for 3 years in 55. And so Kohler keeps using Barnett and Doyle to book his talent from their new company, because Barnett was already his booker, right? And so when Doyle came in to partner with them, they just kept Kohler's booking. More than likely, this was a business decision on Kohler's part to stabilize his territory or whatever. But Barnett and Doyle then they started spreading out from Indianapolis into Kentucky and Ohio and Wisconsin. And in Indianapolis,
were they members of the NWA?
No.
No, so they could spread out anywhere they wanted to, basically.
So they went from drawing about 3,000 and 6,000 to drawing 10,000 and 13,000 in Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
So then the next town they go to is Cincinnati. So they launched Studio Wrestling on December 27th, 1958 on WCPO television. Angelo Poffo beats Wilbur Snyder for the U.S. title.
Oh, wow.
And the first year that they're in Cincinnati, they draw 100,000 ticket-paying fans in Cincinnati, and they get 185 grand from those 100,000 fans. And in 1959, they drew the all-time attendance record at the Cincinnati Gardens, 15,299 people paying $25,402.
Wow.
And the guy that they used for their announcer on the Cincinnati show was a guy named Sam Mineker.
Yeah.
That you guys have heard of before.
Well, sure. Sam was the announcer in Australia, which ties him into Jim.
Right. So after you were going to say something, John?
No, yeah, I was just thinking about that. You know, these guys were not part of the NWA, right?
No.
This seems like this is like a huge existential threat to the NWA. I mean, these guys are wunderkinds, man. These guys are printing money in places that was dead, right?
Right, which is about to lead us to me answering your question about Mushnick and wrestling at the Chase, right? So they get Cincinnati hotter than firecracker, right? And so Barnett goes, "What do you think about Detroit? Maybe we should go to Detroit." So they decide to go after the incumbent NWA guy there, a guy by the name of Harry Light. And they go in and start bringing TV in from Windsor, Canada, right? They put the show on there. Well, I mean, they bring Dick the Bruiser in there. He's their lead babyface crazy dude. And people just loved it, right? They exploded in Detroit with live studio wrestling. Bruiser was the guy that turned people on to pro wrestling up there, right? They had great commentators. They had innovative angles. People were gathered around their television, and then they were coming to the Olympia in Detroit to see this wrestling show. And Barnett and Doyle put $18,000 in the market before they ran their first show. Wow. They ran their first show on April the 11th, 1959. And so they sort of established this pattern that promoters and bookers would have later on in the territory days where they ran their TV for 3 months. And then they were going to run a show and see what happened. And that first show was going to tell them what the market was going to be, right? Well, the first show draws 16,226 people paying $40,000. And just like that, Detroit's one of the biggest wrestling cities in the United States.
And that's the same template that Vince McMahon, our Vince McMahon Jr., which they're not called by that name, but our Vince McMahon would use when talent would come in.
Right.
It was 3 months. It was always 3 months, right, Jerry? You put 3 months of vignettes, and you establish this guy as a person. You explain who he is, and all of a sudden they debut, and
as I said, and as we talked about when we started the show today, you're going to see stuff that's going to repeat itself, right?
Parallel.
You're going to see these paradigms continue to appear, and these ground rules are being made that people will follow, right? The thing about Barnett and Doyle, and the thing you bring up, Mr. McMahon, he's a guy that kind of was able to do this too, is they could see outside the paradigm. They could see when the market was changing, and they could see when things were happening to make a move. A lot of these other guys couldn't see it. They'd get stuck in the bottle, and they couldn't see what was going on, and they'd stay on the same pattern. And when the pattern didn't work anymore, they just kept doing it. Whereas a Doyle and a Barnett, they're making the rules, right? They're not following them. They're making all new ones.
Wow.
So they get Cincinnati, or they get Indianapolis hot. They get Cincinnati hot. They get Detroit hot. This is in 1959. So Mushnick is in an interview with this guy named Raymond Hunter from the Department of Justice in the offices of the hotel in St. Louis where Sam has his office. And this is all documented in the because the FBI and the DOJ, they wrote down everything, you know. And so in the files, there's this conversation between Hunter and Sam Mushnick. I'm going to quote to you what Mushnick says. He says, the connection that a lot of promotion work is being done by promoters who are not confined to specific territories, and that these promoters will enter into agreements with wrestlers and contracts with TV stations for TV time, and then they'll sell that to advertisers. And these promoters will probably be able to obtain licenses to run shows in other states, making it possible for one promoter to run shows all across the United States. This is scary stuff.
Wow. That's was 91.
59.
Wow.
He's like, this ability to take a studio television show and to put it in any market you want to, if you can get licensed to run a show there, you don't have to stay in your confined territory anymore. And he's like, this bothers me. You know, Mushnick's like, this is a problem. And essentially in the back of Mushnick's mind, he's thinking, these dudes are going to go national.
Yeah.
Right. And they would have, wouldn't they?
Well, yeah, they kind of are working that way. I'll tell you what their territory is here in just a second. So I just given you 3 cities here, right? And so they're gathering these big towns, and they're not only putting talent under contract that are not part of the NWA, but they're creating new talent like Dick the Bruiser. You know, they're making stars that haven't been NWA guys. And so Mushnick tells the Department of Justice, you guys need to put some regulations on this. Like you need to put some stuff in place to make sure that these television wrestling shows that are taped in television studios, you need to make sure that those things can't be, you know, distributed everywhere. They
so
got to.
Mushnick is trying to get the DOJ to help him keep his monopoly.
He's trying to get the DOJ to fence in studio wrestling.
Yeah.
So he can keep his monopoly. This is
this is May the 23rd, 1959. Right? So later on in 1959, guess what debuts in St. Louis? Wrestling at the Chase.
Studio wrestling.
Studio wrestling, right? He's no dummy, right? And so the only difference is Sam isn't planning on distributing it, right? He's not planning on it. As a matter of fact, Sam at this time, and a lot of people kind of look over this in history too, Sam at this time is actually scaling back because the St. Louis booking office is booking Memphis. Sam Avey actually, and a guy down in Memphis, they're running Memphis, and Sam's booking the talent. He's booking Evansville, Indiana. He's booking Louisville, Kentucky. He's booking all the Missouri towns except Kansas City. I mean, his office is booking a wide swath, but he gives up Memphis to Roy Welch in 56. He gives up Louisville. He gives up Evansville, and he's actually fencing
was
himself
Sam
in.
actually into the panhandle of Florida, or is that somebody else?
No, he wasn't.
Or maybe he was down in Louisiana.
Well, Barnett and Doyle are.
Okay, Barnett.
So yeah. So I think that's interesting. So in 59, here are 2 shows that pop up in 59. One of them is the St. Louis Wrestling at the Chase show. That comes on like the next week after this DOJ interview. Sam interviews with the DOJ and says, you got to do something about studio wrestling. Well, next Wednesday, studio wrestling is on in St. Louis, right? Yeah. and then in November, studio wrestling is on in Memphis. You know, and then it just kind of starts popcorn popping from there, right? Here's the Doyle and Barnett loop or whatever. So they're the booker and promoter of Detroit. They're the booker and promoter with Balk Estes in Indianapolis. They're in Louisiana with Don McIntyre. They're booking talent for Minneapolis. They're booking talent for Omaha. They're the bookers and the promoters in Cincinnati. They're the bookers and promoters in Denver. They're booking talent in New Orleans. They're booking talent in San Francisco. They're booking talent in Tampa with Cowboy Luttrell. They're booking talent for Jim Crockett in Charlotte. They're booking talent in Atlanta for Don McIntyre and Ray Gunkel. They're booking talent in Columbus, Ohio with Balk Estes, and they're the bookers in Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
So they're from Tampa to San Fran to Windsor, Ontario, all the way down to New Orleans.
That's right.
They're nationwide.
They're bigger than the NWA.
Right. They're getting there. And it's
well, what's going on with Dallas? I mean, I'm just throwing that out. It seems like Dallas, Ed McLemore, where's he playing this?
So this is about getting close to the time where Fritz takes over from Ed McLemore in 62 or 63, somewhere around in there. So they got their own war going down there, and from the 50s to the 60s.
It's kind of interesting. You know, you talk about studio wrestling. The only studio wrestling around right now, I guess, I haven't seen a lot of little local shows, is NXT, right?
Yeah. Did you consider the NWA a studio show?
Maybe. Yeah,
I don't watch it much, so I don't know.
But NXT is just essentially a really, really souped up show.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it started in Florida, you know. I think I'm not a big super watcher, but
yeah. These guys had to be rolling. I mean, absolutely rolling. I mean, there's a lot of power here. They control. I mean, the NWA had to feel like they were in a fight for their life with these guys.
So that's all the towns they're involved in as bookers and promoters, but then they're running their territory. So in Indiana, they're running Terre Haute, they're running Seymour, they're running Lafayette, they're running Fort Wayne, they're running Newcastle. In Kentucky, they're running Louisville and Lexington and Covington. In Ohio, they're running Cincinnati and Toledo. In Wisconsin, they're running Milwaukee. In Michigan, they're running Detroit and Grand Rapids. In Kansas, they're running Wichita, and they're trying to get into Kansas City. In Massachusetts, they're running Boston. They're running a little opposition in Boston with Paul Bowser. They're encroaching on everybody. They're not discriminating against anybody.
Tony, what you're saying just to kind of put a light bulb above me. When we started into Michigan and Ohio, that's the reason everybody, because of Barnett's background, that's the reason everybody was scared to death about what we were trying to do when we opened up those three, actually West Virginia, Ohio, and Michigan. We went in where she could burn the territory down, and we had to reestablish ourselves. And once again, it was Barnett's blueprint that we did it on through TV and Building Managers Association. So that's the kind of the prelude of what we did with Georgia Championship Wrestling when we started our promotion.
Well, that was something you saw that had happened before, right? Barnett had been in there before. He knew those Michigan and Ohio towns, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so when we get there, that's kind of interesting, right? That whole thing about when you guys go back in there and work out a deal with the guy that they sell Detroit to.
That's right. That's right. Barnett sold it to him and then got it back for pennies on the dollar.
Right.
And pennies may have been too much. It was pretty much
pennies was way too much.
So what I think happens here, Jim Collins talks about it in his book Good to Great, is you end up, when you're really successful and you're on a roll, you start thinking this will work everywhere, right? I mean, exactly. we got the formula. All we got to do is just put our stuff in there, and we'll get things rolling. And there's no way we're not gonna, everywhere we go, we're gonna be successful. Well, that one thing that bothered Johnny Doyle the rest of his life was Los Angeles. And he tried to go back in there in 55. He tried to go into Vegas and Los Angeles, and he got cut off by Kohler because he made a deal not to with the Eatons. And Doyle is thinking, I got the firepower now. I don't need anybody else. I got my own talent this time. I know I got the backing. I got the tools. I got the cash. I'm going after the Eatons again, right? I'm gonna go back and violate my non-compete again, right? Because when he sold it to him back in 53, 54, he had a non-compete. Well, that's what got the Eatons all upset in 55 was this guy signed a deal when we bought this from him. He wouldn't compete with us, and you're an NWA member. You're a brother. You got to help us out. And so Kohler goes, well, if you give me a couple things, I'll give you a couple things. And they worked it out, right? And Doyle got left holding the bag with his TV contracts, and nobody'd be on TV. So now it's 61. It's 6 years later, and now he's back on top again, and he's like, I got to have Los Angeles. So he goes in, he tries to form a company called Luchadors Incorporated. That's going to be the booking and promotional vehicle for Los Angeles. and the athletic commission will not give him a license because Cal Eaton and Eileene are saying, you can't let this guy do this now because we got the license. We've been good to you. We're paying all our fees. You're making good money. Don't let this guy in. Well, there's an article that comes out in 61 in June in the Los Angeles Times, and it's Johnny Doyle's lawyer. And he says, the Eatons have had their monopoly over wrestling in Southern California, and we intend to get the bottom of what's going on here. Right. So he doesn't get a license, so he moves his event back to October the 7th. And on July 28th, the commission gives in finally. The second time he comes back, they give him a license to promote wrestling. And he's going to have his matches at the sports arena, which is just a mile or two down the road from the Olympic Auditorium. Mm-hmm. Well, Doyle and Barnett so Eaton's are on KTLA, which is the strongest station in Los Angeles. Well, Doyle and Barnett steal it from them, and they get KTLA to give their show on instead of the Eatons. And they booked the sports arena for October the 7th. So KTLA, by the way, I will tell you, you always hear about TBS. The next superstation in America on satellite was KTLA in Los Angeles. The one after that was KTVT, Channel 11 in Dallas, then WGN in Chicago, then WOR in New York. So I think it's just kind of interesting piece of trivia about television. But Doyle, so this is back when television stations paid them to be on. And they'd been paying, the reason they got it from them is the Eatons was getting paid from the TLA $2,000 a week. Doyle said, we'll do it for $300 a week. And so wow. they get the show, right? And so they put together a deal. They said, we'll have 3 or 4 matches. We'll have some interview segments. And if you'll give us some spots to promote our show and $300 a week, we can do a deal. And they did it. So they're thinking, man, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Detroit, we have killed it. We're going to kill them. We're going to kill the Eatons, right? So the Eatons decide to book a show the night before on October the 6th. And they're like, we're going to circumvent this, right? We're going to sell tickets to fans before his big show. And, what they always said, we're going to put TV in the market for 3 months. We're going to see what the first show does, and that'll tell us basically what the market is, right? Well, at the Olympic on October the 6th, here's the Eatons. They had Luthez, Antonino Rocca, and the hot new star for the Eatons, Freddie Blassie. They draw 12,000 people and $32 grand. At the sports arena the next night, Doyle and Barnett's got Dick the Bruiser, Vern Gagne, Killer Kowalski, Wilbur Snyder, Bobo Brazil, Don Leo Jonathan, and they draw 4,000 people. And the Eatons won. And Doyle and Barnett go, well, it didn't work. So we're not, they gave up on it then. They're like, well, we ran our first, they ran our first
one show and they give up on it.
We ran our first show. It didn't do good, so that tells us the market, we can't do it. So they backed off, right? But they keep killing it in all these other markets. They keep making a whole bunch of money. I think you guys think about this, and this is an interesting point of discussion. And you kind of see this happen again later on with other promotions through the years. I think the one thing that was different about this with Barnett and Doyle was Cincinnati was weak. Indianapolis was weak. Detroit was weak. And the Eatons were strong. And the markets that they had a lot of success and they were really on fire, the product was not good, right? And the promoters were not good. And the wrestling product was terrible. But in L.A., they just had, Freddie Blassie's the hottest thing since sliced bread, and they're killing it. And they attacked somebody that was on fire instead of the markets before. That's kind of my theory about why it didn't work for them.
And Blassie was a brand new talent at that time, too,
right?
Correct?
And one thing for people that are listening here, Tony, there's so many things that we've talked about that people think things are. Sometimes they think things are new. I told you article I read where it talked about the original screw job, was, that this front running people, like when Vince decided to put a pay-per-view on Thanksgiving Day and call it Survivor Series because all of a sudden Mr. Crockett was getting a pay-per-view for the first time ever. This has been going on since the beginning of promotion.
Yeah.
Beginning of promotion anywhere in the world. Like AEW and WWE and NXT, and they're running different places, and guys are front running each other. Guys are running the same towns, they're running the afternoon shows in the same city. It's just, this has been going on forever.
Well,
This is standard operating procedure.
Well, this scenario here reminds me of '88 when Jimmy and Dusty decided to put their pay-per-view into New York, the Bunkhouse Stampede, and Vince's stronghold, right? Like, why would you go attack somebody in their strongest place when you're really not as strong as they are? You know what I mean? Like, it just strategically doesn't make any sense.
You know what they always use there to Tony, and I'm just surmising on Dusty and Jimmy's part, but we ran Richmond. Richmond, what, 90 miles from D.C. They always thought we did so well, and we'd go up to Fredericksburg, which is right across the border from D.C. And well, we did well there. Well, if we could do well in Richmond, the outskirts of it, we could do well in right inside their backyard, which we couldn't. They couldn't do at the time. So I think that was kind of the philosophy. Well, we almost did. So Doyle and Barnett run into the first failure out in L.A. So circle the wagon. What happened at that time there?
So they're still successful. They got their towns going. They're booking talent, pretty much in all those markets. I'd work in cooperation with the other promoters, and they're making a lot of money. And as will happen, we saw it with Doyle, right? He booked this big show. We saw it with Schwartz. He booked this big show, and then from there, it kind of goes down. And part of Doyle's problem was when he got successful, he got kind of reckless and crazy, ended up getting divorced, got a lawsuit from a lady he knocked out, and, just kind of the success kind of blew his head up and all of that. Well, Barnett's experiencing the same thing, except he's experiencing it back in the background in the shadows because Mr. Barnett, we haven't mentioned it yet, but he's homosexual, right?
Really?
And, well, that wasn't really all that known back then.
Yeah, was that an it? He just did such a good job of keeping it on the low key, or
pretty down low. Pretty down low. I mean, most of the boys in the business knew about it. People in the business kind of knew about it, but people in the towns and the communities that he worked with and all, they didn't know. I mean, and so he's living in Indianapolis and decides he's going to relocate to Lexington, Kentucky. So, because in 59 and 60 and 61, he's involved in this deal with football players from the University of Kentucky. And the primary focus is always on the 62-63 team. But when they looked at it, it was going on back to 1959. But people weren't aware of it. In 62 and 63, when Bradshaw comes in to coach.
Hey!
I told you that John's
wait.
cousin. No, John, step aside here and let Tony finish.
No, you got to say which Bradshaw. Not just
Charlie.
to say Bradshaw.
Oh, Charlie Bradshaw. Charlie John Bradshaw was the name.
Coach Charlie Bradshaw.
You know what sucks is my middle name is Charles. God dang it.
So when he's there,
it really is.
When he's there, he's such a hard-ass guy. He knows about it, right? And when he gets there, they got 88 people on the roster, 88 players, and he brutalizes them in practice and all to the extent that 50 of them quit, 58 of them quit. He only has 30 people on the roster.
That was a prelude of the Junction Boys out in Texas A&M then.
Yeah, he was a Bear Bryant disciple and assistant coach for Bear Bryant, and actually, everybody thought the players and the team was going to do really well under Blanton Collier. He was the coach before, but for whatever reason, they decided to fire him. And when they fired him, they brought in this coach, Charlie Bradshaw, and he's just terrible. I mean, you read this book, it's called The Thin 30, and you read this book written by Shannon Raglan about the things he put them through and the things they had put up with. You add to that the racial tensions at the time. These guys were living on hardly anything. They were in poverty. They had no money. And all of a sudden, here's this businessman, they think, Jim Barnett's a businessman, and he's friends with this superstar actor at the time, Rock Hudson, who's also homosexual. And Barnett and Hudson, they got a relationship, and all of a sudden, here's these two guys.
No,
And
wait. I want to make sure because I never heard that. So Barnett and Hudson are either dating or hooking up or whatever, right?
they got some kind of relationship. I don't know what.
You never heard that, John?
No, I'd heard they'd known each other. I just assumed they were, but I didn't know they were, dating or whatever, hooking up.
I don't know that, but they've got a relationship.
Now was Hudson a football player, or was he just a student? How did they meet?
Somehow in Barnett's Power Base building.
Now, where was Hudson? Was Hudson not in Hollywood? Was he wasn't in Kentucky, was he?
No, Hudson would fly in to either Indianapolis or some nearby city, and Barnett would send his car for him, right?
Yeah.
So they would ride around in either Barnett's really nice car. Sometimes Sam Mineker, who was the announcer on the Cincinnati show, had a Rolls Royce. And sometimes Barnett would borrow his car. And they would ride around in this really expensive car.
And Hudson at this time was a huge star, right?
Huge.
Okay.
Huge. I mean, he became a big star in the 50s with Giant and all that stuff. So they'd ride around in this really expensive car. They'd show cash. They'd sometimes have really nice looking girls with them. And they'd invite them over to Barnett's house, which is lavish and big. They'd have buffet. They'd have food. They'd have all you could drink. And then they'd get this coercion going on for these, be a predator on these football players, right?
And Charlie Bradshaw.
So this is, quit saying that name. So this is Sodom and Gomorrah in Lexington, Kentucky, right?
That's right.
Now, how did he meet Hudson? Does anybody know?
I'm not sure about that. Maybe I can find out before our next show. But
I'd be interested to know. I mean, obviously Barnett's a famous guy, and Hudson's a famous guy, and
yeah. I mean, so they in some circle, that they both ran in or whatever. Now, in addition to this, and there's nothing to hook these two guys with it, but the 50 players that quit the team, there's some suspicion about what happened to those scholarships that those guys gave up. And somehow or another, they're also kind of involved in maybe that a little bit. And there's also an attempt to fix a game with Xavier, a point shaving deal that they're kind of involved in. So there were things beyond just the homosexuality.
Yeah, Tony, I don't understand the scholarship thing, because how would they pinch the money? Because the money is just like it's paid
to the school.
Yeah.
Well, that's but I mean, the money's not paid to the student or paid to the school. It's usually just paid directly to the books or classes or dormitory or whatever else. It's not even money isn't even transferred. It's just a bookkeeping ledger transfer most of the time.
I don't know exactly how that worked, but
because I've heard the same thing about them stealing the scholarships. Allegedly
somebody did.
Somebody did.
Yeah.
But there usually isn't in scholarships money. It's usually just a ledger transfer of books and housing and food at the dormitory and stuff.
I mean, if you read this book, you can tell these dudes are scarred, though. I mean, they are affected for life. Like one guy said, he rose up to the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Vietnam War, and he goes, I've never been with guys that had as much trauma as these football players. Like some really dark stuff happened to them.
Now, did it come from the coach and also from Rock Hudson and Barnett?
Well, it was a combination between what they were going through with the coach on the football team and what they were going through to just survive by hooking up with Barnett and Hudson. Like, I understand it. Like, I don't think
how long did that take place? How many years was it?
From 59 to 62, 63, right in there, about 4 years.
Wow.
Lonnie Winter was
Lonnie, the guy in Australia.
This is the thing about this is that's bullshit about this. Somebody had to know.
Well, Bradshaw knew. The coach Bradshaw, he knew about
Charles, your uncle.
No, don't call him coach. Do not call him.
Yeah,
Uncle Charlie knew.
No, stop it.
Evidently, this guy was just so focused because his thought was, look, this football team has sucked. It's like any coach, right? If I come in here and I'm a success, this will propel me on to other teams. It'll still put me on the map, right? And he just was he took it to an extreme that's just unbelievable, trying to be successful.
And he you're saying that he knew about Hudson and Barnett?
Yeah, according to the book and according to the investigation papers and all. Yeah, he did.
Now you mentioned a name we kind of just shut you off on, and I apologize for that. Charlie, Lonnie Winter. Lonnie was a main character to our second part's going to be coming up in Australia. Well, describe to me Lonnie's place at this time.
All I know is he's just Mr. Barnett's companion, right? Okay. He's just the guy that's with him all the time. He's cruising the streets with Barnett. Barnett
did, just like he did at Australia. He was the scout. It was the scout.
Barnett did not drive, so he hired a driver, and he and Lonnie would be.
Jim couldn't see. That's reason he didn't drive.
And so they would just be passengers, right? He'd hire somebody to drive either his really nice car or Miniker's Rolls Royce, and that was part of the.
Now that's where Lee Marvin come in too, or have I got that right?
Lee Majors.
Lee Majors.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know a whole lot about that, but yeah, that is where he came in also.
Wait a minute. We got to get to Lee Majors, a $6 million man. How does he fit in all this?
He's part of it.
It was a driver. It was a driver from what I understand.
Is that right?
He was a driver for Barnett.
Or Barnett, yes.
Now, was Majors part of all this?
I don't think so. I think he just was a young guy that got hired to drive.
He just got hired to get drive, and that was it.
But I mean, you got these poor, hungry, beat up, mentally traumatized college guys, anywhere from 18 to 22. And there's this invitation from this big time movie star to come to an extravagant party with food and drinks and women and all that. I mean, they're not going to turn that down. It's food, man. I mean, they're getting barely alive, and they're getting brutalized in practice. So, it's an interesting scenario.
Yeah. And then what's come out through the investigations was Barnett and Hudson were just piece of shit predators.
And when the heat got on, that's when Barnett scooted out, right?
Wow, what horrible people!
And
how did the heat come on him? Do you have that scenario?
When it started coming out about the scandal, Now what happened was
how did that break? That's my question.
The university put a big squash on it because just a few years before, the basketball team had been in a point shaving scandal with NYU in the NCAA basketball. Right?
What the hell's going on in Kentucky?
Yeah, I tell you,
Charles Bradshaw.
Stop it.
I mean, they thought, man, we've been in trouble and we've been on probation with the basketball thing. When this football thing comes out, our athletic departments, they're gonna shut it down. So they squashed it. But Barnett's like, it's time for me to.
How do you squash a big name like freaking Rock Hudson?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It didn't come out. I mean, when I was a little kid growing up in Kentucky, I heard a little bit about it, but it wasn't really widely talked about. It didn't come out like a big deal until this book came out. This book came out 2000, something like that,
and exposed the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. So at the end
that was 20 years later before the book come out.
Here's what the book says. It says Barnett and Winter left Lexington very quickly at the end of 1963, almost overnight. Wow, that's what the book says. Almost overnight.
So the DOJ, was it the DOJ that started investigating these guys? Who started investigating these guys?
The athletic department.
The athletic department did first. They did an internal investigation.
That's right.
Now, did this get up to the legal level of the police or?
I don't think so.
Lawyers or anything?
I don't think so. I think they kind of put the lid on it, the athletic department.
What a bunch, hell is reserved for those people that were doing the investigation that didn't stooge this. And now hell's reserved for Barnett and Rock Hudson too. But I mean, God almighty, man, what a disservice you're doing to the kids that you're supposed to be taking care of in school. You're doing an investigation. You find out that this movie star and this wrestling promoter are doing something untoward that sounds like molestation to these kids. And
it was molestation.
Okay, it was. I didn't know for sure if it was. Okay. So, which, when you know it's that and you don't do anything about it, you're a horrible human being.
Right.
You've got to stop it. You got to expose these guys because they'll do it again somewhere. This is just.
But big time athletics. I mean,
100%. Yeah.
I mean, I just kind of laugh at people nowadays. They're like, I can't believe we're paying players. I'm like,
right.
I'm like, you just found out there's no Santa? Like, what's
Right.
So Lonnie and Jim,
I'm just mad that I never got paid. I'm just upset that
shit.
I got $25 a month. I got paid, man.
I never got nothing.
I never got
didn't
anything.
get nothing.
I maybe
I
had
got a scholarship, but I didn't get paid.
I might have had a tutor do my homework a little bit, but I didn't get. I never got any money. So this is like, man, we got to get out of town.
So
And
they scoot out. They scoot out of 19.
So let me just
at the
frame
end of
this a little bit
63.
better. So the athletic department does an investigation on this because obviously it's gotten too big and too bad, and
Well,
so they're on investigation.
I think they did some kind of self-imposed something. You know, I think they turned in some things, probably not to the extent we just talked about, but they turned in some violations and got rid of Bradshaw, and they self-disciplined themselves, which the NCAA will let you do if it's not. You know, they probably presented it like this is.
It's insane to let you do it, even if it's a felony.
Yeah, or I mean, they probably presented it like
it's a crime against humanity. This is horrible what they've done.
And they might have, you know, I'm just speculating, but they might have made the possible Xavier thing and the scholarship thing. They might have made that the big deal, and minimized the terrible things,
right?
And said, hey, we found this. We're going to take care of it though. Like
they basically started to say, we found this. We're going to take care of it. By the way, and they let Hudson and Barnett know, Rock Hudson and Jim Barnett know, guys, you guys got to get out of town, and you guys got to leave and leave our kids alone. I understand that, you know, that.
Yeah,
but that should have been a discussion with the county sheriff, not with those two guys.
Yeah, I don't.
So Barnett leaves the town there now. Hillman, Doyle, what? They go west at this time here to pick up Australia, or what did Jim?
So they start thinking about how damaging this is going to be. And you know,
let me ask you a question. Does Johnny Doyle know all that's going on? Does he know what has happened after it's happened?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay.
I mean, speculating a little bit, but I mean, obviously, if you look at it, they both go to Australia after this. You know,
were there any comments about the NWA or any of the other wrestling organizations about Barnett?
Not that I know.
Well, he's a bad seed. We'll just push him out.
Not that I know of, Jerry, but later on when we talk about Jim coming back to the States, when he comes back and gets in with the NWA, they're going to put some limits on him, right? Okay. I mean, he's going to be a powerful kingpin in the National Wrestling Alliance, but he's also only going to have so much that they're going to let him do.
Well, hell, later he becomes president of it.
Yeah, no, he never became president, but Mushnick wanted him. Mushnick wanted him to be, but the membership wouldn't have it, you know, because of some of this stuff, right?
So he goes out west. How's the connection come now where he's moving down to the
Yeah, so Jack Little is the announcer that was in Los Angeles that used to work for Johnny Doyle on television, and now he works in Melbourne for Channel 9, which is the nationwide channel in Australia. And he calls Doyle just serendipitously at the right time when things are on fire in the United States and Barnett's got this problem. And all of a sudden he gets this call from Jack Little in Australia. And he goes, hey, man, you need to bring this stuff you're doing in the United States out here because you guys will put on a better product. You can get on here Channel 9. You can have nationwide distribution. And, man, this would be, you know, you could set the world on fire out here. That's how they get the call from Australia. It just happens to be the right escape hatch for Mr. Barnett.
And it goes on, which we won't go into because we'll shut it off right around here so we can get into, because there's, as wild as all this is, it gets just as wilder for the next 20 years. I mean,
right.
He is integral to
for the rest of his life. Yeah,
he's a pillar of wrestling. You know, some horrible shit he did, but there's also some things that were just pillars that wrestling is built on. And he ends up doing a heck of a deal with Rupert Murdoch.
Right.
In Australia.
The biggest media kingpin, going to be the biggest media kingpin in the world.
Which a lot of you see in Rupert Murdoch later at Fox came out of it looks like the professional wrestling backgrounds, a lot of it with Jim Barnett.
Yeah. So at the end of 63, they get this call from Jack Little, and Barnett and Doyle go to check out Australia. They take a trip to Australia. They go around and look at all the promotions. They go around, look at all the towns, and they're like, we can take our deal here, right? We can take the same thing we were doing in the U.S. We can come here and do it. Wow. And there will be less resistance here than we encountered in the United States. There's no L.A. here that's going to be as strong, and all these towns can be ours.
You know, there's quite a relationship there, and you know, loyalty. It seems like Sam Maneker, a name we met that was an announcer. Sam went on. He was the announcer in Australia. Jack Little continued to be the announcer and the TV guy and the promoter in Melbourne for him. And Sam Maneker was down there also. So he had a tie-in, you know. Lord Athol Leighton out of Detroit. He was a part of the Sydney group with Jim also. So Jim, it seemed like certain people he was very loyal to and kind of brought them along for the ride.
Yep, that's right.
Well, Tony, hey, this has been incredible, and we still got another 1 or 2 parts because we're going to cover all of Jim Barnett and Johnny Doyle's lives, and they've got some incredible things coming up that they helped change the wrestling business. It's an amazing story. It's hard to believe that more hasn't been done on Jim Barnett.
And we're going to get to a point where Mr. Brisco is going to come on the scene too, so that's going to be exciting.
That's right.
All right.
Well, Tony, thank you very much. It's at Tony Richard 4 is your X, and we'll see you, I guess, next week according to how this airs. But if you want to check it out on our YouTube channel, depends on when you watch this, it'll be right next to it, or it'll be a week from now. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you soon in part 2.